Hello, I am here as your guide to living in Elizabethan England. Whether you are a lord or a peasant, this video will instruct you on the proper way to eat, marry, and prosper. Let's begin. When preparing a meal,
keep in mind your status in life. The food you eat is a showing of how wealthy you are.
You should eat as much meat as you can afford. For example, King Henry VIII and his court ate 8,200 sheep, 2,330 deer, 2,870 pigs, 1,240 oxen, 24,000 larks, and 33,000 chickens in 1 year. However, since you are not a king, here's a recommendation of what you should be eating. The staples of your diet should be bread, beef, and beer. Meals are to be eaten 3 times a day. A simple breakfast in the morning, a substantial dinner between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. that could last up to 3 hours, and finally, a light supper that is served at about 5 p.m. For breakfast, one could serve fish, such as a pickled herring, cold meat, and bread. A midday meal might consist of meat pies or stews from a tavern, and finally, dinner could be cold meat, bread, and cheese, very similar to breakfast. Other foods that might be consumed are black bread, cheese, eggs, a few vegetables, and the occasional mutton at public feasts.
You may have noticed that this diet leaves something to be desired. A common health problem was a deficiency of vitamin C. This was responsible for paranoia, irritability, and a lack of control. Another health problem was ergotism, which was a disease prevalent in areas that grew rye. This was a cause of miscarriages and nervous diseases, and is sometimes cited as a cause of localized outbreaks of witchcraft.
Now, you may be wondering, what did these people drink? Water was not often consumed because of pollution. They did drink large amounts of ale, and beer caught on later in the century because it was easier to make and kept much better. Milk was only drunk by children and the elderly, and it was usually milk from donkeys. Cider was popular in the country, and chocolate drink also appeared later in the century, but only the rich could afford it.
Another important ritual of society was manners at the table. Much of life revolves around the table in Renaissance England. To start with, we will set the table. Tablecloths, napkins, and spoons were provided at some of the finer tables. However, guests must bring their own knives. Forks did exist, but were not used as individual eating implements until much later. Other table implements included the finger bowl for washing one's fingers, and the salt cellars. Salt may seem unimportant to you and I, but it was actually a show of rank. The great salt was placed in the center of the table. Important members of the household and guests sat above the great salt, and servants and inferiors sat below it. Drunkenness at the table was frowned upon. But belching and wearing hats was considered appropriate.
At the bottom of the social ladder were the peasants, or yeomen. These were the men who could live gentlemanly lives without manual labor. Next were the knights and esquires. Esquires were men whose ancestors were knights. Knighthood was earned, not handed down generation to generation. Ranked above the knights were the dukes, marquises, earls, and barons who made up the peerage. Finally, at the top of the social ladder was the court. The court was considered everything within a 10-mile radius from the home of the monarch. However, this was subject to change as the monarch moved around quite a bit. The court consisted of between 400 and 800 people who accompanied the monarch, along with their servants, including the attendants to the king, attendants to the queen, the master of the horse, servants of the master of the horse, the kennel staff, and entertainers.
As kingdoms grew, yeomen began to evolve to feudal lords, owners of manors or houses that were leased to other peasants in exchange for money or manual labor. Knight service was related to the landowner and the crown.
There were also 3 different types of tenants: freeholders, tenants who had fixed payments for life; leaseholders, tenants who had fixed rentals for a fixed number of years; and customary tenants, or copyholders, who paid rent but owed no labor services to the landlord. Other peasants labored on land that was rented by others in exchange for wages and 2 or 3 acres of their own land in the common fields. Manors were considered units of estate management that included 1 or more hamlets and a larger village. Knights could own more than 1 manor and hired stewards to oversee the manors. On Lady Day and Michaelmas, accounts were presented. A new method of accounting, developed in the 1620s, introduced the use of paper and Arabic numerals. 3 volumes of records were required for large manors, 1 for income and 2 for expenditures.
Now, as we watch many of our friends and peers get engaged and married, one might be wondering how this would occur in Renaissance England. Well, courtship is a very long ordeal. The ideal relationship was a well-planned love match. Men were generally 2 to 3 years older than their brides. Contrary to popular belief, only 1 in 4 women were married before the age of 20.
Step 1.
The man writes to the girl's father, asking permission to court his daughter.
Step 2.
If he is given approval, he will visit the girl and give her a ring.
Step 3.
On the second visit, he would bring her a pair of gloves.
Step 4.
Each time he called, he would bring a different gift or novelty until the wedding.
Step 5.
Then, the man and woman were betrothed and wed.
In accordance with the Church, one could not marry someone within the 4th degree of consanguinity, or someone who is related to them closer than through their great-great-grandparent. This rule also applied to widows and mistresses. Weddings were an intricate 5-step process that included a written contract between the parents that set up financial arrangements, the betrothal ceremony, which is an exchange of promises before witnesses, a public proclamation to ensure that there were no previous contracts that involved either party, a church wedding, and then finally consummation.
Weddings were fantastic ceremonies that started between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. The bride would wear a white or russet gown. The groom would place the ring on 3 successive fingers of the bride's hand before it was left on the 3rd finger of the left hand. This was to protect her from demons.
After, the wedding party would feast and the bridal chamber was blessed, and then the bride and groom were put to bed by their friends. However, not all marriages were the happy unions they were supposed to be. Marital infidelity was very common, but divorce was not an option. An annulment would be granted for the following exceptions: incest, pre-contract to another person, lunacy, male impotence, and bigamy.
As you can see, life in Renaissance England was very different from our time now. I hope that this instructional video will help you blend into society.